This past July, Nigel Richards, a man with the beard of a prophet and the memory of an elephant, won the French Scrabble Championships. What's peculiar about this is Richards is not French. In fact, he doesn't speak the language at all. Something is clearly very wrong here then, right? I mean, Scrabble is supposed to be about wielding a mastery of language, piecing together labyrinthian words on the board, and scoring Brobdingnagian points. Yes, that's a word. So either France is terrible at word games, or there's something else going on. How could you win a game about word usage if you don't know how to use the words? Well, most people think that being good at Scrabble has to do with having an exhaustive vocabulary, but that's not really the case. And if you look at the history of the game, you'll see why. In 1938, when the American architect Alfred Mosher Butz created it, he gave each letter in the alphabet a letter point value. This is the little number on the bottom corner of the wooden tile that tells you how many points a letter is worth. To tabulate this, he counted the number of times a given letter appeared in periodicals such as the New York Times and the Saturday Evening Post. Then he assigned each letter points according to the frequency. E, which is by far the most common letter in English, became worth 1 point. Less frequent letters like F, H, and W were worth a couple more, and linguistic lone wolves like X and Z were assigned high point values. So forming longer words with rarer letters would net you the highest score. This meant that the best Scrabble player was the person with the most comprehensive knowledge of language. Duh. Everything was finalized and the rules were bolted into place, and for a while, this was fine, as the letter point value was in step with mainstay 1940s publications like Action Comics and Time magazine. But then a funny, if not predictable thing happened. Over time, the way people spoke shifted. New words were invented, old ones went out of style. I don't know about you, but ducky shin cracker is not exactly a phrase I use every day. Deadspin recently ran some calculations, and if you look at what a letter points value should be if adjusted for the current rate of usage, 14 of the 26 letters are off by at least 1 point. It seems B, C, F, H, K, M, P, V, Y, and Z are all overrated and should be worth less points than they are, while U, Q, L, and J should actually be worth more. Therefore, reading 5,000 paperbacks and studying the Scrabble dictionary does not automatically crown you the god of Scrabble. Sorry, Aunt Nancy. According to Quackle author John O'Loughlin, the way our vocabulary has shifted over time creates a tricky situation where letters that are easy to use are worth high points and letters that are hard to use are worth low points. However, an ordinary player like me will look at two pieces with the same letter point value and naturally assume that one is just as good as the other. Their logic goes Q and Z are both worth 10 points. Therefore, Q and Z occur just as frequently in language, so I'll have an equal opportunity to play Q and Z in Scrabble. This may have been the case in 1940 when the game was invented, but today this is a big mistake because there are more Z words than ever. In this janky unofficial Scrabble dictionary I found online, now there are 1,400 Z words compared to just 580 Q words. That means Z is a better piece than Q because you get 10 points for it and you have way more opportunities to use it. So to be really good at Scrabble, you must take into account how a shift in vernacular has thrown off the scoring. If the game was recalibrated today, Q would actually be worth more like 14 points, while Z would only be worth 6. Again, according to Deadspin's tally.
Shaq-tastic, 29 points.
How did you get so many Qs?
Don't worry about it.
You're probably saying, wow, Scrabble is really broken. Why doesn't Hasbro assign all the letters new point values? Get with the times, people. But I think the discrepancy between the letters and their points actually makes Scrabble a better game. It creates a hidden layer of complexity that Magic the Gathering's Mark Rosewater calls lenticular design. To be the best, you have to learn an ulterior level of strategy that ordinary people don't even know exists, one that strangely involves math and probability and beards instead of spelling and vocabulary. Or you can just do what I do, wait for someone to play a really long word so you can stick an S on the end of it. Shazam!
My turn again.
So what do you think? Should Scrabble be strictly for wordsmiths, or do you love the deeper strategy? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about the camera and Frogger. Let's see what you had to say. Martin Monk brings up Resident Evil, which also, like Frogger, had a restrictive camera, and it was essential to creating a particular atmosphere and directorial feel of the early games. We've talked about this in the past, but Resident Evil actually had the camera shift from different points of view in each individual room, depending on where you were, which is pretty cool and very revolutionary at the time. But then when Resident Evil switched over to the over-the-shoulder camera that could swing in any direction with Resident Evil 4, The series lost its emphasis on being scary and just kind of doubled down on being an action game. So that's a really good example of how a simple change in the camera's point of view can have huge implications for the game design. It's something that ostensibly, hopefully you'll notice in the future. Ray Squirrel brings up Alfred Hitchcock, who used limited point of view to create suspense, which is an excellent observation. We've referred to Hitchcock a lot throughout the life of the show. He refers to, Ray Squirrel that is, refers to the cemetery scene in Family Plot where the audience is looking down on the characters from an orthogonal perspective. People always argue about whether or not games should be taking cues from film or not, and whether there are more than surface similarities. For a while, I remember when I was first getting into games, there was this idea bandied about, which when will games have their own Citizen Kane? Film was often held up as being this sort of paragon of excellence. But I think that camera techniques are actually a place where games and film can have a meaningful dialogue. In a lot of other places, I don't think that's necessarily true. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, was a radical experimenter when it came to building suspense with his shots. For instance, the entire movie Rope was famously shot in one long take, which is interesting because games, if the camera doesn't shift, are really shot in one long take. You could think of something like Fallout 4 or Skyrim as being these very long single take movies, although I guess if you want to count going to the menu screen as some kind of cut. In any case, you do see this conversation happen in a lot of other games. One of my favorites, Kentucky Route Zero, draws very heavily on the filmic techniques of Tarkovsky and films like Solaris, again with these very dramatic sort of long shots. So anyway, so game designers can look to people like Hitchcock and others in terms of direction in that regard.